go? Should we get this
Yeah,
party started?
let's go.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining. We are excited to spend today talking about elastic talent. What does that mean? How does it happen? All of those good things. So, kicking us off, um, I am Rebecca Warren. Let me go ahead and switch the slide here, though. Maybe that would be helpful. Rebecca Warren, I am with Eightfold. I have been here for just under 2 years, former practitioner, now current vendor. Have worked in TA for most of my career, and now I'm excited to lead customer success for Eightfold. Holly, I'll flip it to you.
Awesome. Just a heads up, I think the slide didn't move forward.
Not yet. I am in process. Hang on a
I
second
see.
here. I've got to switch to a different screen, remember? And I'm not
Oh,
doing
yeah.
it well. Give me a second.
No worries. So
Uh,
as you pull that up, hi everyone. My name is Holly. I am a product marketing manager here at Eightfold. I am about 6 months in, so pretty new to Eightfold here, and also very new to the HR tech industry, but not new to the contingent workforce. So thanks for joining us.
all right, give me a quick second. I'm going to stop my share and then reload it. It's being funky. So 2 seconds.
Technology.
Technology.
It's a love-hate.
All right. Holly, tell a joke, sing a song, tell a story. Give me two
Ooh.
seconds.
All right, not good at that on the spot.
Okay, wait. I'm
Huh,
coming back. I'm coming back.
thanks. Thanks for the save.
All right, let's make sure. Okay, let's see. Can y'all? All right, can y'all see the screen now?
Yep, can see the title slide.
Perfect. All right. And can you see the next slide?
Yes.
Whoop, whoop, party on. Here we go. Okay. So as we do this, we have introduced ourselves. We're going to talk about the agenda in just a second, but just to let you know, I'm going to be on the slideshow on a different tab. So Holly's going to be watching the chat. This is going to be a little less interactive just because we can't actually have you pop on and chat. But if there are things that you want to know more about, or if you have questions, throw it in the chat. Holly will watch it. If we can't get to it during this session, we'll make sure to follow up with you. Holly, does that sound right?
Yep, that's perfect.
All right. Do you want to go ahead and talk through the agenda and what we're gonna be doing today?
Sure. As Rebecca mentioned earlier today, we'll talk about these three topics right here: how to bend with an elastic talent strategy, how do you prepare for the market shifts. You know, it's very relevant these days with all the stuff we're hearing in the news, and then we'll round it out with key considerations for an elastic workforce.
All right. So we're going to jump right in with a poll.
We have some fun polls for you guys today.
Yes. So you should see that showing up on your screen soon. What's the biggest challenge you're facing in recruiting or in talent acquisition today? Hiring freezes, finding candidates with the right skills, unrealistic expectations from hiring managers, or lack of candidate volume?
Currently, we are at a tie with hiring freezes and finding candidates with the right skills. But let's,
Okay.
oh, it keeps jumping. We have some people for unrealistic expectations, lack of candidate volume.
So kind of
Oh,
all
and it's
over the
moving.
board.
I think currently, if we give it maybe 30 seconds, in the front runner right now is finding candidates with the right skills.
How interesting that, Holly, we're actually going to be talking about candidates with the right skills and what are the right skills. Yeah, I have to say, I'm kind of just staring at that skills pay the bills meme, like I'm just watching the Lego man just jump over and over. I'm getting distracted. Yeah, I mean, I think all of these are really relevant, but it is interesting to see what folks are facing. All right, so where do we land?
We are tied with skills and unrealistic expectations from hiring managers.
All right. Well, let's talk about that for just a few seconds before we switch to the next slide. I think hiring freezes certainly are hitting everyone right now. We're seeing that in some areas more than others, but hiring freezes are absolutely something that's happening, which normally happens right around the end of the year. I think most organizations say, hey, let's hold off until we hit our new budget. Usually fiscal starts after the first of the year. We're seeing a little bit higher hiring freezes going on right now, so we'll certainly talk about that. Candidates with the right skills. I think the question is, what are the right skills? Do we actually really need those skills? We're going to spend some time talking about what that looks like from hiring for a background as opposed to hiring for skills. Unrealistic expectations from hiring managers, always a challenge, right? Because they want everything and they want it now. And so as recruiters, it's interesting to have to find the perfect person, but also work to, should I say, sell the person that can do the job right now that could take some training. Lack of candidate volume, that is an interesting thing right now. Last year, I think we saw a ton of folks that were looking, and now that has changed considerably. So all of those are fair considerations. Any thoughts on that, Holly, before we switch to the next slide?
No, I mean, I think from my perspective, I really thought hiring freezes were gonna win this poll. So it was very interesting to see right around the like the candidate side, and then also the expectations of hiring managers.
Yeah, and I think it probably depends on your organization, your industry, actually locations, all of those things tend to factor in.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about the things that have happened over the past few weeks or months. And I do want to take a step back for a second. So I know we're all really tired about talking about the pandemic, right? It feels like it's so overdone, like we just want it to go away. But I do want to say there are a few things that should be called out. So we've heard it said in some form or other that out of pain comes progress. And the pandemic certainly brought both, right? Lots and lots of pain in lots of different ways. But it also did bring in some progress into the workspace. So, first, many employers learned that remote work was not only possible, but it was really effective, both in results and in reducing costs. And second, employees realized that they actually have choices. Perm roles in offices were not the only way to work or to get work done. I know I started to say that life is too short to live where you don't want to live or do work that you don't want to do. So that was actually one of the reasons why I'm at Eightfold, is because I had the opportunity to work remotely and I could live where I wanted to live. And so now I'm in Arizona. So when you think about, and let's talk about working remotely for a second too. Like, how many of us are right now enjoying the business on the top and the party on the bottom, right? Anybody in yoga pants or shorts or hanging out in your flip flops? So, like,
Guilty.
there's a lot of benefits, I think, to that shift. But I think with the flexibility of where we work, also came the understanding that we have flexibility in how we work. So with the changes in the market right now, a lot of this seems to be in reaction to overhiring last year to compensate for what happened during the pandemic, especially in full-time permanent roles. So, and let me say this as well, I am super bummed for everyone who has been impacted by those changes. It's super rough. I get it. If you want to reach out to me on LinkedIn, I'll see what I can do to help you find your next gig. But I know that's tough. But even in the light of all of that, organizations still have hiring needs. And so companies still need to backfill existing workers. There are folks that are leaving the organization. There are new projects and new things that are happening in order to support future growth. So while the market stories look a little grim, I don't know that it's telling the whole story. And I think there's a lot of things we can talk about when it comes to different ways of working that could potentially help to fill some of those gaps. If we look at how many jobs were added in November, there's a lot of stuff that's still happening. And maybe this is another learning for organizations, that there are other ways to get work done, and for employees there are other ways to do the work. Holly, I just talked a lot. What are your thoughts?
No, I think the sentiment's there, right? It's like to your point where a lot of the news is very disheartening, but then you see these stats of like 263,000 jobs were added across the country in November. Like it's like okay, it's still happening. It's just kind of how the news picks it up.
Well, that's right. And who knows what those jobs are? Those all could be new jobs. I mean, you think of a lot of the jobs that were added during the pandemic, things that have changed since the pandemic, positions that have come and gone, work that has fluctuated. A lot of that could be positions that maybe didn't exist a couple of years ago. So,
Right.
lots of opportunities. I think a lot of times we just have to think differently, not only as candidates or employees, but also as organizations. All right, are we ready for our next poll? This is another interactive section of our opportunity here. So we're curious to know, what does elastic talent mean to you? And we're leaving this open-ended and asking you to put your answers in the chat. What does that mean? I know that those words sometimes don't necessarily feel like they belong in the business space. And so curious to know, what does elastic talent mean to you? Holly, what are you seeing in the chat?
Nothing yet, but as people are typing, I can kind of talk about how they're from an eightfold perspective, at least, as people trickle in. So at Eightfold here, we use Elastic Talent to really talk about the contingent, connecting contingent hiring into like the overall talent strategy. So allowing businesses the flexibility, like you mentioned, to scale up or down. So for example, hiring in a time of need when things are getting really busy and they need, but then when they need to scale back, when demand is lower or when they're reevaluating their workforce and strategy. So just allowing that flexibility.
Yeah.
All right. So responses are coming in. We're seeing lack of wrong one. Agile talent, transferable skills, adaptable, ability to pivot, building skills for any role, cross-functional, flexible, adaptable. So it's a lot around that.
I love those words. I love agile,
Yeah.
adaptable, flexible.
We have nimble talent, which is also a good one.
Nimble. Oh, nimble, such a great word.
Yeah.
Well, and we think about this, Holly, you and I were chatting about this. How many words are there for folks who work in more of an elastic talent space? And so we came up with 1, 2, 3, 6, but there could be more. So if we think about elastic talent, it could be labeled, you could be labeled, or folks could be in a bucket of freelancers, giggers, temps, contingent workers, consultants, contractors. Any other words that we're missing when you think about elastic talent or contingent workforce? What other words should we be thinking about, or that maybe is being used right now in the space? Any other words coming in?
Not at the moment.
Okay.
I think we hit the big easy ones. I think that's
Yeah. So if you think of other ones, pop them in the chat, because we want to make sure that we're thinking through all of the words that could cover what an elastic talent strategy looks like. And so when we're talking about elastic talent, we're looking at what does that look like from different ways to utilize folks to do the work, right? In a standard organization, we tend to think of permanent full-time hires or maybe permanent part-time hires. But most of the time when we think about hiring, we think about somebody left the organization, we need to backfill them. Somebody, we have a new opening on our team, we need to pull in somebody full-time. That tends to be the way that we think most of the time, unless for some particular reason the hiring manager is like, I only want somebody part-time, or, this isn't a position that we're going to look at long-term, but for right now we need to bring somebody in. But for the most part, I think when we think about hiring, especially coming from a TA perspective, we tend to think about permanent full-time hires. But there's a lot of different ways to think about filling positions, and especially with our market right now and what's happening in the industry, things are really flexible. A lot of Fortune 500 companies are expanding their contingent workforce. One stat I have here is expanding up to 30% by 2025. The next 18 to 24 months, the predictions are we're going to see a increase in contingent hiring that will stay. And 20% to 60%, kind of a fluctuating number, of contractors actually applied to a full-time role in the last 3 years and ended up working in more of a consultant or a contingent space. So I think those numbers are super interesting when we think about what contingent workforce looked like back then and what it looks like today. And I know coming from, I was in TA for a long time, and coming from a space of a lot of the smaller organizations that I worked for didn't have any kind of plan or policy to handle part-time contingent temp work. And so I was the one creating that. I love now that we have a lot of organizations have operations teams, HR or TA operations that does that. But I was the one that was doing it. So I really jumped into all of the things that had to do with contingent workforce, whether it was vetting agencies or figuring out, are there direct hire folks? Are there people inside the organization that could be a fit? Putting together what co-employment rules look like, all of that stuff. I think there's a lot more openness to that today, thinking about how do we balance what our organization needs and what our employees are looking for in terms of flexibility in where and how they work. Contingent hiring certainly is becoming more of a permanent solution and part of folks' processes as a go-to as opposed to a last resort. And companies and folks are really start looking at who do you know to help bring them into the organization. So, Holly, what are your thoughts on the elastic talent strategy benefits?
Yeah, I think it was interesting to hear, like when you were in TA, you kind of owned the contingent hiring strategy as well. So that, I mean, I can only imagine how much time you had left to do your day job.
Some days not much.
Right. Yeah. So, and I think like, and I talked about it before, where like the elastic talent strategy is really how do we start to incorporate the contingent workforce into a holistic talent hiring strategy?
Yeah.
Because to your point, you can't have one silo from the other because that just breaks everything up. And there's just no communication, and then there's just more bumps and hurdles
Mm-hmm.
because of that.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. Well, so I want to do another poll here if we're ready, because we want to first understand how you feel about your talent acquisition goals and the things that you're trying to accomplish in your TA, HR space. Do you feel like perfectly planned out, work in progress? Again, I'm getting distracted by SpongeBob running around, complete chaos, and going with the flow. How are y'all feeling about your talent acquisition goals and strategy coming up over the next year or so?
All right. So none of us look like we have it perfectly planned out.
Nobody. Drat.
But it looks like a lot of people are a work in progress.
Okay.
And then the next one is complete chaos.
There's sometimes a real challenge to try to predict what's happening in the market, what's gonna happen inside of organizations, right? We talked about earlier hiring freezes or positions that are changing or groups that are reorging. It is hard sometimes to predict what's going to happen next week, much less try to think about putting together a strategy for the next 3 to 5 years. So, all right. So did we land that in that bucket of a work in progress and complete chaos?
Yeah, so there is a tie for second place for complete chaos and going with the flow.
Okay.
So, but majority is a work in progress. So at least
okay.
people are thinking about it.
Yes. Excuse me, I am fighting a cold right now, so if I have to put myself on mute for a second or if I have to cough, I'm really sorry about that. I'm trying to stay hydrated so I don't do that. All right, so fun stuff. So let's talk about market shifts. We've already seen, just in what we looked at before, what's happening with layoffs, hiring freezes, organizations rethinking their strategies, hybrid work, remote work, everybody back on site. There's a whole bunch of things that are going into that. When we think about what may help organizations to deal with the demands that are continually changing, there's a lot of things to be said for employing a elastic talent strategy, thinking about how are we going to accomplish those things that are expected of us in TA or HR or even as a business leader? How am I going to get this work done if A, I don't have headcount, or if I've got to think about doing X amount of work with the people that I have? What am I going to do? How am I going to be able to manage that, right? So here are some thoughts we're just going to throw out there to prepare for these shifts, which I think are going to continue. I don't know that we're ever going to go back into the work is 9 to 5. You show up, you do your work, you have your hour lunch break, you go home, and you're done. I just don't think we're ever going to get back to that 1960s, going off to work and coming back home in this set 9 to 5 schedule. So some of the things to think about is that workforce and hiring strategies. Could you rely on a contractor or a temp or a consultant to help while you're thinking about backfilling particular roles so the work still gets done, but you have an expert who is in there getting those things accomplished? Workforce optimization. This was one thing I talked about in a webinar earlier on this summer, was for TA folks on how to make sure you're adding value even if you're not carrying a full rec load or if things are changing. How do you get the most out of your current folks inside of your organization? Could you connect more closely with your vendors to find out what work they may be able to lift and shift for you? How do you look at folks inside of your organization to add value, do some cross-functional projects? How do you use the resources that you already have to make sure that the organization is running as effectively as it can be? Looking at these skill gaps, if there's particular areas where you say, we just don't have anybody to do that, is the only answer to hire that full time? Should that be using a contractor or a consultant for a defined period of time to meet those needs while you have maybe internal folks upskill or reskill? And then looking at this testing new roles, I'm going to flip this one to you, Holly, for you to talk about what testing new roles is all about, but then to share a little bit about your time in testing a new role.
Yeah, so I think especially now when there are gaps to be filled and trying to fill that as soon as possible, a lot of businesses now are trying to figure out, do they need a full-time position for this role, or should that be just, kind of a testing ground contractor role? So I actually was someone who was in a test role as a contractor for my last company. And so basically they were thinking about restructuring the ownership of specific programs. So essentially transferring a program from one org into another. And in order to see if this is something that they should expand on and be a company-wide initiative where we bring everything under the corporate team, they opened up a contract role. And that's kind of how I entered into that company prior. And so eventually, they found that it was successful and I was converted into a full-time employee.
Love it. So I'm going to do an informal poll right now, Holly, that you and I have not even talked about. So here comes a surprise. But I'm curious to know from the folks who are on right now, have you ever been in a consultant or a contractor freelance gig, however we want to refer to that? Have you ever been in one of those roles? Or have you moved from a contractor to a permanent position? I'd love to hear if anybody out there has done that. I know I've worked a couple consultant roles, which I found really interesting. I learned a ton, added value to the organization, and then popped out, handed it over to other folks to be able to take the work forward. Anyone else been in a consultant or a contractor role or converted from a consultant to a perm? Or maybe went from a perm position into a contractor?
Tammy responded, and she said she's been both.
Okay, fun. So you've seen both sides of the fence. You know that it can work. All right.
Lois as well used to be a finance consultant and then became a CFO.
Oh, well done. I love it. Okay, cool. That was just a fun little aside to see if there have been folks who have done both as well. And I'm sure that there are other folks who have worked for organizations that have decided to use a contingent worker as opposed to maybe filling a position full time. Okay.
Yeah.
So time for another poll. we had a lot of fun with this one, went back and forth about trying to figure out what song lyrics might describe your organization's contingent workforce strategy. So I love that we put in the little graphics there. That's amazing. All right. So if you've got it all figured out, you have a contingent, robust strategy. You may be singing from Oklahoma that it's a beautiful day. I'm not going to sing for you. Everything seems to be going your way. You've got it all figured out. If you've got a moderate strategy, are you going, I'm all right. Don't worry about us. We got this all figured out, little Kenny Loggins? Could be maybe existent, like just a Katy Perry plastic bag drifting through the wind, not quite sure, taking it as it comes? Or are you, hey, we know we need one. We don't really know where to start. We're kind of, flying blind here. So doing a little Beatles, help me if you can. How are we trending here?
I think a lot of us are plastic bags.
Oh, okay. Anybody singing the songs in your head now? Am I going to give you a new earworm that you're going to hate us for later?
For the rest of the week, yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, so it looks like we have Katy Perry as number one as the winner. We have Kenny Loggins and then the Beatles.
Oh, nobody's singing from Oklahoma, huh? Well, I'm not super surprised at that because I don't know that a lot of organizations consider a contingent process an elastic talent strategy. I think there's a lot of work being done in the space. I think there's a lot of organizations that are trying to figure it out. And I think there's a lot to be said for planning the work. So, Holly, you and I talked about that, right? If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So I think there's a lot coming around what an elastic talent strategy could or should look like so that you're prepared for things that happen in the market. So let's talk a little bit about some considerations or why you may want to pitch or engage in thoughts around an actual strategy instead of saying, I need a temp, right? And thinking about what does that look like. So if we think about what this looks like, it's really about allowing everyone who works with talent the visibility to adjust to shifting work demands. So what does that look like, right? It's not all about full-time hiring. It could be using your internal talent, reskilling, upskilling. It could be looking externally in a lot of different ways. So Holly, you want to talk a little bit about what we're saying here when we talk about scaling up and down with your internal pool?
Yeah, so this is touched on it a little bit earlier. As businesses need to, they have a ton of work. Business needs to keep going, right? Even though if there's a hiring slowdown or even a freeze. And so taking a look at your internal pool to see who have you engaged with previously who can be a good fit for this. And then scaling down as when business slows down is reevaluating, is this the right position or the right skills that we need for this specific position, or how can we move them elsewhere for something that the business needs at that moment?
Yeah, I don't know about you, but have you ever, and I'll throw this out to the group too, feel free to throw stuff in the chat. Have you ever worked with somebody inside your organization that you're like, oh my gosh, they would be great at X, right? Somebody maybe in finance who you were like, whoa, they absolutely should be over in our product group, or somebody who is in recruiting where you're like, wow, they'd be awesome in a tech role. Have you ever had that feeling when you've worked with someone that maybe they could take on either additional work or would be great on a cross-functional project? I think sometimes we get stuck in we hired Bill to do this role, and that's the role that Bill does. And if something changes about that role, then Bill needs to leave the organization and we need to put in Peggy or whatever. And I think when we start looking at our internal organization to see how could we engage folks from different areas of the business to do different things. One of the things in HR we're always looking at is engagement surveys. Are people engaged in the work, right? We've heard about this quiet quitting and all of these things that are happening in the market. How could you engage the folks inside your organization to say, if you could do something else, what would it look like? And maybe allow some cross-functional work inside your organization to be able to not only help your internal folks grow, but also add a diversity of experience and background into a position that maybe you only thought I had to hire externally for that. So I'll stop
Yeah.
talking for a second. Go ahead. Perfect.
Sorry, no, I was just going to say,
Good.
absolutely. I think that that was the beauty of Eightfold and why I decided to join Eightfold, right? Because there, I came from Salesforce. It's a huge, massive company. And so there's a lot of different types of roles that, some people might not be aware of, especially coming from a different side of the house, whether you're the corporate team or you're on product. Just it's so massive that you just don't know how to transfer your skills. So, like for example, if there was someone who was like an executive assistant, they have a ton of skills, right? Like they are incredible people. But if they were trying to expand their skill set or look for a new opportunity or wanted to change, they could be a great project manager and they wouldn't even know where to start. And so I think just being aware of the different type of skills and how they can transfer, like using your internal pool, I think that is one. It's a huge cost savings, and also like it. I think it just opens up the doors for both parties.
Yeah, I love it. And that's actually something that we've done inside of Eightfold several times, or we've had someone who has been in the support function who has moved into a more technical role. We've had folks who have come from talent acquisition. On my team right now, I have someone who's come from support and someone also who has come from talent acquisition moving into customer success. And like your story, Holly, I didn't have any customer success background. My undergrad is in youth and family ministry, and I was a youth director for a while, which I absolutely loved, but it's tough to make money there. And then moved into talent acquisition, and I've been doing that for a long time. So kind of ooching in a little bit into this next one, that direct source from employees, contracts, and applicants. We're talking about that from a contingent workforce perspective. But for me, using the skill sets that I had from TA coming into customer success has been a really strong match. We find a lot of folks that have teaching or education or front-end customer or people engagement work out really well in customer success. So looking at different folks that and how I got here was someone who was in sales here said, and she was a previous vendor for me when I was in TA, and she's like, oh my gosh, I think you would be great over here. And I was like, I've never heard of Eightfold, and I have no idea what customer success does. And here I am, been here almost 2 years, so I guess I've sort of figured it out. But thinking about where are your talent pools coming from? And for contractors, contingent workforce, people, especially if you've got maybe a really niche role that you're looking to fill, pulling in someone that you've worked with in the past to see if they might be open to, maybe it's a short-term gig, maybe like, hey, we need somebody for 3 months, or maybe saying, I just need a couple of hours in the evening. I am not advocating for saying don't do your day job in favor of doing a night job, but there are a lot of folks who are able to do work on the weekends or help fill gaps with a flexible schedule. So who do you know, right? Who's in your network, your talent pool? Folks maybe that, maybe were silver medalists for a position that might be interested to come back and do some work for you. Who might be a good fit? Maybe that's somebody that you've seen on LinkedIn that you wanted to approach. There's a lot of ways to find folks to direct source to fill some of these opportunities if you don't have someone inside your organization. Holly, I said a whole lot. Does that all make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay,
Absolutely.
good. Well, and then looking at this third bucket, and I know coming from a TA perspective, I've always done some friendly fighting with agencies, right? Because a lot of times in TA, we have this sense of, I've got to own it. And if I have to go to agency, it means I've failed. I've grown up in my thinking and now really understand that there are times when you just need a third-party agency that specializes in a particular area or maybe has a large number of candidates available to work a job. Let's partner together. So there are times when you may want to reach out to a third-party agency that does all of the work for you to fill those short-term needs. It could be maybe a large volume project that you just need to get knocked out. A lot of times that's warehouse or maybe mailroom stuff or other things that you have where you're like, I just need folks and I need them now to get this project done. But it also could be augmenting your staff where like, hey, we just didn't realize this volume of work was coming in. We need someone to do this. Or it could be, as we've already talked about, getting something new off the ground for the next few months. That was one of the things that I did in a consultant role was I spent time helping create a talent acquisition strategy for an organization. And once it was up and running, I felt great, handed it off, and then somebody else was able to run with that. So before we pop off the slide, Holly, any other thoughts or anything in the comments that are coming in that we should be paying attention to?
Lois has one. She says, doesn't pulling in people you already know work against DEI? If you always turn to the same group of folks, we aren't reaching out to a more diverse pool. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, that's actually a great point. I think there is something to be said about your network, but there's also something to be said about introducing new folks into your organization. So I think that's a great call out. Make sure that you're not just tapping the same people all the time, but how could you think about your network maybe in a more diverse perspective, making sure I'm not just going to hire my friends all the time. There's certainly opportunities to work with people that you've worked with in the past, but you do, I agree, have to think about bringing in folks that are going to complement your organization as opposed to bringing in copycats. That's a good call out. But I still think that there's a lot of value to your network, and maybe what that means is that you need to broaden your network. I know that is actually one thing that I've talked about on my goals for this year is I have gotten a little lax on my LinkedIn. And even like for webinars like this, I haven't even promoted them and told other people that they're happening. I'm a terrible person in that regard. But one of the things that I've put on my list is to expand my LinkedIn network and to start doing some networking meetings and networking calls that I haven't in the past. So if you want to be part of my initiative, of my goals for 2023 and reach out so we can have a networking conversation, let's do that. Because in some cases, maybe the people that you're always tapping is because you haven't focused on expanding your network and making sure that you're pulling in new people into your pool. Great call out. All right. Any other thoughts or things that you wanted to bring up?
I think that is it for now.
All right. So let's wrap this up and then see if we have other questions or things that you wanted to chat about. But in summary, you want to talk a little bit, Holly? You want to start and talk about building that workforce based on today's market instead of previous perspectives?
So we started off with, the scary doom and gloom of like hiring freezes and, all these layoffs and everything. But to get ahead of that, I think, like if you build a workforce based on how you, on today's market, right? So if you are scaled back right now, business still needs to be get done. Business still needs to happen. So why not think about how do you fill those gaps with contingent workers? And then later on, I think as business gets better and, hiring is happening again, think about, like, oh, well, this person already knows my business and my processes. So let's think about if they would be a match for full-time. So just really build that workforce based on what you have now and how it could evolve in once things are moving again.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when we think about what contingent hiring or elastic hiring looks like, I will be honest, in the past, when I've thought about contingent hiring, it felt like we're hiring temps. And it felt like we're just going to find a body to come in to take the spot for a short amount of time. And as I mentioned before, I've grown up in my thinking, not only with third-party agencies, but what does that look like to bring in someone to augment your staff? And I've really learned that a lot of these folks have a ton of skills that are really important to the business in this particular space. There's something to be said for generalists, and there's something to be said for specialists. And a lot of times in our organizations, we have a lot of generalists, and sometimes we just need specialists, and there's nothing wrong with that. So bringing in a freelancer, a gigger, a temp, a consultant, a contractor. There's not only things to be thinking about from an organizational side where we say, I don't really want to bring in a temp. There's a lot to be said for bringing in someone who can get the work done, who specializes in it. But there's also a whole nother area which we haven't spent any time talking about, which is going back to what we started with that flexibility. There's a lot of folks who have said, I will never work full time in an office again. I don't want a permanent position with a company. I want to do my own thing. Lots of folks started their own business or said, I'm going to work as a consultant, a career consultant. That's my job. I want to learn about different businesses and I want to pop in and pop out and not have to do some of the politics or, worry about those long-term strategies. So that's one of the things that we really haven't talked about either is that the workforce itself is changing. And a lot of folks have said, no, I don't want a full-time role. I'll come in and do this for you for 6 months, or let's take it on a quarterly basis and then reevaluate. A question to throw out to the team as well. How many times have you, if you're in TA or even in HR, how many times have you had a candidate recently, maybe in the last year, said, no, I'm not moving, or no, I'm only going to take this gig if it's at least hybrid, if not fully remote, right? Workers are also saying, this is a lifestyle I want to pursue. So organizations not only have to wrap their head around that there's value in contingent hiring, but also saying my workforce might not be available in a permanent position that's going to come in and do a 9 to 5. I may need to switch what I'm looking for or how I'm looking at it based on who's available at any particular time. Thoughts on that or thoughts on the chat?
No thoughts in the chat, but yeah, as you were speaking, I just remembered like a post from my one of my old colleagues on LinkedIn was like, hey, some of you might have known that I started a content marketing agency and I'm looking for work 20 hours a week. Let me know if you know of anyone to support that. So to your point, where like a lot of these people are kind of having their requirements and saying like, this is what it's going to be.
Yeah. And that dovetails right into that last one, right? That non-traditional sources of talent. Where can I find folks that I haven't looked before? Inside my organization, projects, cross-functional work, my network, the folks around me, reaching out to agencies that maybe you haven't used before, finding folks on LinkedIn, asking the question of who does this really well in the space, and then searching them down instead of looking at, hey, we have to hire this as a perm position. There's only 6 people on the planet who do this role, and none of them are available. So wrapping this whole thing up, looking at an elastic talent strategy may be something that you will want to consider either baking into your TA goals for next year or thinking about bringing it to your organization to wrap that into a bigger picture to start working on that change management to get folks thinking differently instead of just saying, I've got an opening, I've got someone to fill it, or this job has changed and this person doesn't fit. We're going to have to let that person go and find someone else who's perfect. Because honestly, there really isn't that perfect hire, purple squirrel, unicorn, whatever we're calling them these days. We need to be thinking about what kind of skills do people have that are going to fit into the role to get the work done. All right, I'm done talking. Holly, last thoughts before we sign off.
No, I think you summed it up nicely, very in a nice, neat bow.
All right. Well, folks, if you have any questions or if you need anything, reach out to us on LinkedIn. As I said, my goal is to be better about using LinkedIn. So if you send me a message, I will absolutely respond.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have yourself a great day.